So Germany is in bad shape and the story keeps getting worse. I really don't understand how they can keep doing things that are just destroying their own economy. It doesn't make sense, but let's do this. Germany is in a recession, not just for 2 quarters, but for 3 quarters. Their central bank is admitting that the German economy will shrink again in Q3 this year. And believe it or not, things are about to get worse. In our lead story today, Germany is facing a minefield of economic horrors. Recession hit Germany is facing a flurry of global headwinds, and this predicament is down to three main factors. Manufacturing is collapsing, energy costs are still very high, and China is simply not buying German goods anymore. As long as these three factors are crushing Germany down, it is near impossible for them to recover unless they solve this. But the Germans are moving ahead to decouple from perhaps their last economic lifeline, which is China. But instead of shaking hands with President Xi and linking up their supply chains together, Germany is looking to break everything apart. We even have the German foreign minister take a page out of Biden's playbook. During an interview with Fox News, she called President Xi a dictator, and this is so bizarre and it's just destroying bilateral relations even further. The Chinese are calling it absurd and open provocation, and this really isn't good and shows Germany is moving closer and closer towards the West, towards the United States. But here's the hilarious part. As much as Germany wants to move away, they are still addicted to Chinese money. If China stops buying German products, their economy could literally collapse towards a deeper recession. And here's the latest problem. The EU President von der Leyen has hit China with an EV vehicle subsidy probe. Basically, she doesn't want Chinese vehicles coming in and stealing market share from European manufacturers. She isn't happy about China subsidizing their EV industry because it lowers the cost of Chinese EVs. And do you know why China can subsidize their industries? Because unlike Europe, they don't have a massive inflation problem. Europe's inflation is well over 5%, but China recorded a negative inflation rate back in July. In fact, according to the West, China's deflation is supposed to destroy their economy, right? China should have collapsed at least 20 times by now. But it is this move to choke out China's EV from the Eurozone market that is freaking Germany out. Because if it happens, you best believe that China will start putting up trade barriers to prevent EU products as well from entering the mainland. And according to the economy minister, German car makers are afraid of China's retaliation to the EV investigation. If the Eurozone decides to impose duties and tariffs on Chinese vehicles, this could spell doom for German automakers, and this could evolve all the way down for a tit-for-tat trade war with Beijing. If you try to make it hard for us to import our cars to Europe, we are going to make it hard for your imports to enter China as well. But here's the big difference between Germany and China, or for that matter, Europe and China. China has a huge domestic consumer base, and their cars are being produced at a very competitive rate. And when we are moving towards a recession, you better believe that price matters. The average cost of an EV in China is less than 32,000 euros versus 56,000 euros for one made in Europe. And it's all about the ability to manufacture for cheaper, and Chinese technology in the EV space is actually better than EU tech. And that's why German automakers like Volkswagen just invested $700 million into a Chinese EV maker for just 5% of the company. And do you know how much money that is for such a small stake? Volkswagen is doing that because they desperately need the technology for their cars. Which brings me back to my main point. What Europe is trying to do is blindfold themselves and ignore the elephant in the room. It really isn't China's fault that your EV cars aren't selling back home. It's because the technology isn't good enough and the price point is ridiculous. And if you trace the genesis of this problem, you will come to the root cause, which is higher energy costs. Unless Germany and the rest of Europe solves this problem, they will always be losing to Chinese cars. And all these trade barriers aren't free market behavior, and they are more of protectionism, right? They are basically trying to protect an industry which simply isn't competitive anymore. And that's why Habeck, he's sweating bullets. He still needs Chinese money to flow into the German car industry, or the implosion will be really ugly. And he admitted this during the Transatlantic Forum. German cars are so well in China. The German automotive industry is afraid, and rightly so. We would have to fear counteraction. And this essentially sums up Germany's problem. They are being controlled by European policy in Brussels, in the EU, Countries like France can pull away their incentives from Chinese EVs because they aren't selling many cars in China, right? It really doesn't affect them that much. Most of the cars are the BMs and Mercedes zooming around, so Germany can't afford to do that. But von der Leyen's probe into China's EVs will likely spark retaliation, and Germany has to come along for the ride. They are part of the EU after all. And what Germany is facing is a big reality check that actions have consequences. Germany needs China, but China doesn't really need Germany. And also consider this fact: in 2022, Germany was China's biggest trading partner. In total, almost 300 billion euros of goods were traded between each other. And yes, it is true that there's a big trade deficit between Germany and China. Germany imports more than it exports to China, and it's because German industries are no longer competitive. This 2 to 1 disparity is because Germany hasn't solved their energy crisis and prices are so high. And we have to come back down to earth. Honestly, what is the point of buying German products when the quality is no longer that superior, but prices are 50% or even double that of Chinese goods? It's not some big conspiracy, guys, but simple economics. But a big shout out to our sponsor today, Ground News. It's getting increasingly hard to source for accurate news today because you're not sure if what you're reading is biased. You need to hear the other side of the argument. What's the other story? Take the recent BRICS expansion for example. Different sources gives you unique perspectives. Foreign Policy, which is a center publication, gives the straight facts, highlighting how BRICS invited 6 new countries, while the Australian Financial Review's title focuses more on BRICS moving to counter the G7. Both are high factuality sources but coming with different angles. Understanding both perspectives is crucial to appreciate the facts as well as the different biases. And this is where Ground News comes in. It is an app and website that gathers all the world's media in one handy place. This is awesome to get a full picture of what's being reported around the world. In addition, with the My News Bias feature, you can see how your reading habits change. Have you been reading more articles from the left, or are you leaning closer to the right? The best thing is it helps you make sure you're not trapped in a biased media bubble. And this is especially important when making good informed decisions. It's time to cut out all the bias and find common ground. So subscribe to Ground News by going to ground.news/onfu with the link in the description below and get 30% off unlimited access today. And that's why China's EVs are winning the day. BYD, a Chinese EV brand, saw registrations explode by over 320% in Europe during the first 7 months of this year alone. And riddle me this, Batman, so a car manufactured all the way in China and imported into Europe is still outselling cars made directly in Germany, and this tells us the state of European manufacturing. Costs are simply too high. And we can see the EU-China trade in electric cars has been growing tremendously. At its peak, China exported over 1.3 billion euros worth, and compared to China, Europe has been exporting almost nothing. So you can kind of understand the fear Europe has towards Chinese vehicles. And this is why there are two responses to this manufacturing crisis. The government is doing one thing, while the private sector is doing another. And only one of these solutions can help save German manufacturing. The private sector solution is smart. Remember what Volkswagen did? They are investing into China. They decided to pour money to Chinese EV companies to understand how things are truly done. They need to get a heads up about the technology, and that is the smart approach. And that's what China did in the past and how Germany can regain their industrial edge. Well, the second way is getting cheap energy again, but we both know that isn't going to happen, right? But the EU is taking the exact opposite approach. The government is doing that. They are folding their arms and saying, no, we will make it harder for your cars to come into Europe. We will take away subsidies or we'll slap tariffs on it. And what does this do? It destroys cheap imports into Germany and the Eurozone. Sure, China might export fewer cars, but it's not like all Germans will buy EVs made in Europe. A huge chunk of buyers will simply not buy at all. And this won't move the needle much, especially when your domestic consumers are broke. It's counterproductive. And here's the frightening thing: Germany is still moving forward to cut their biggest trading partner away. They even have a 64-page paper on their so-called strategy on China, which I find very disturbing and obsessive. And now they are getting enormous pressure from their own central bank to decouple more from China. Apparently, what Germany is doing today isn't enough, and they must hurt bilateral trade with China even more. Talk about launching a wooden torpedo at a ship. when you are also on board, the ship isn't going to sink. Instead, the captain is just going to throw you overboard into Davy Jones' locker. In a report from the FT, the Bundesbank is warning that German companies must cut exposure to China. It's no longer a should, but a must, and it's somehow mission critical to decouple with them. And this is where things just get downright bizarre. It gets very messy. Listen to this mess. It's contradictions after contradictions, and excessive dependence on trade with China is one of the main reasons why the country's business model is in danger. No, that isn't a main reason, guys. The main reason is because you didn't innovate enough and your energy prices are through the roof. And because inflation is just so high, you also can't inject subsidies into it. And that's why German industries are declining. And the next reason is just as bizarre. The Bundesbank also warned that 29% of German companies imported essential materials and parts from China. And this is where I truly start to lose my mind. The reason why German companies import raw materials, they import all their inputs from China, is because it is the cheapest around. They can definitely buy from G7 allies like the United States, but I kind of bet that prices will be double or even triple compared to China, and this will just jack up manufacturing costs and crush their industries even further. Prices will go through the roof, and suddenly all the exports to the world will become more expensive. And in a recession, we have said it before, every dollar really counts. So Germany's new China strategy is going to disrupt the supply chains, and if Beijing decides to retaliate, oh boy, this is going to turn ugly really fast. And that's why German automakers are afraid. What if China decides to pull the rug under us? What if China stops buying our German-made cars? Because Beijing is Germany's lifeline, especially when it comes to car sales. If China pulls the plug, this could literally collapse their auto industry. In 2021, Germany's exports of passenger cars to China increased by 14% to 16.7 billion euros. China is the most important customer of German automakers. All those Audis, all those Mercedes, all those BMs are luxury items for the Chinese. It is not an essential purchase. So if China decides to slap tariffs on German cars when the sticker price is already so high, this will likely collapse demand. So this won't end well. And I think this just reinforces the undeniable advantage China has in manufacturing. In this economic war, this decoupling tells us that cheap energy is extremely important. China's getting lots of it from Russia. They have also secured long-term energy supplies from the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, so their competitive edge is going to be secured for years and likely decades to come. Germany, on the other hand, is cutting away anything to do with Russian oil and gas. A German trading company is now facing controversy for handling Russian LNG. They are basically shipping it from Siberia all the way to India. And let's be clear about this, Russian gas isn't coming to Germany, but heading towards Asia. They are simply the middleman transporting the LNG to India, basically a glorified delivery man. However, German officials want this handling to end as well. And here's the big problem. If a German company doesn't do it, other trading companies around the world will. Oil traders are international. If they lose this contract, you'll simply go to China or you'll go to India, and Russian gas still gets pushed out to the world, except this time the profits don't go to German companies. So I hope you can see the terrible situation Germany has dug themselves into. They no longer have cheap energy, and that alone has crippled their industries. And now they want to decouple from their biggest source of cheap imports plus a gigantic export market. So unless Germany really looks at a bigger picture, their recession will only get from bad to worse. This Titanic is about to hit a big Chinese iceberg. So let me know what you think. Will Germany restrict Chinese cars from coming in? And how will China respond? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.